Here in America, work is in trouble. We've offshored our manufacturing, sent away good jobs, and lost so much ability to make things. American Giant is a company that's pushing back against this tide. They make high-quality clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more, right here in the USA. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, promo code STAPLE20.
When you think about businesses like Allbirds or Skims that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But what's often overlooked is the business behind the business that makes it all possible. For millions of businesses, that's Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. With ShopPay, you can boost conversions by up to 50%, meaning fewer abandoned carts and way more sales. Whether your customers are scrolling online, strolling through your store, or browsing social media, Shopify ensures you're ready to sell wherever they are. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/DAX, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/DAX to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/DAX.
Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Maiden.
But what's more impressive to me about the fact
Yeah, I mean, I gotta get
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase.
And Adam
No,
LaRue.
not necessarily, but it's again, it's the same as...
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
And with that, we are back with Operation Domination for another edition of our Team Profile series. Thank you all for tuning in live on our YouTube channel. Make sure you check out Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app. We're available to you wherever you like to listen to podcasts, on the go, on the run, mowing the lawn, whatever you like to do this summer, all year long. I'm your host, Dan Maynard, joined here my boys Adam LaRue, Chris Dowhauer. We do have a special guest in the books, and we're going to be talking about the AFC West. So with no further ado, let's get our guest introduced now. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the FSWA Hall of Famer, the one, the only, Mr. Greg Kellogg!
Hey guys, how you doing? Now, I got to say this, Chris, Adam, you may be great guys, but Dan's got the voice. He's got the voice for radio. He really does.
Well, I appreciate that, Greg. I appreciate you making the time to come on. I know you've been a busy person this past night in particular, so hopefully we're going to have a fun show for you to do, because I would say it's short, but it's not going to be short. We do an hour-long worth of content here. Guys, make sure you chat along with us for those in the live feed. If we have time, we will get to your comments as we go along. But like I said, it's the AFC West. There's a lot to get into, so let's just dive straight to the quarterbacks, straight with the #1 guy, Mr. Patrick Mahomes. There's not too much to talk about here, right? We know he's a top 3 player. I think the only guy of our panel he's not even here, who doesn't have in the top 3 is Chase. He's on vacation, so he doesn't get a say anyway. Greg, when you look at Mahomes last season, he was, QB 11 on a fantasy points per game basis. He was not the elite self that we're used to seeing. Do you think there's a bounce back in store for him this year?
I do. I targeted him in Scott Fish Bowl, which I don't know if your viewers know, is the largest charity tournament in the world. And I had the 6th pick and was thrilled that he fell to me there. Now, it is a running quarterback league. They really, what people call nerfed the quarterback passing yardage. They basically cut it in half in scoring. But I still think he has a huge bounce back here, because I like the additions at the wide receiver position.
That's the big key, right? We're getting some weapons back into the game. Yeah, speaking of the Scott Fish Bowl, I'm in one of those right now too. And Yeah, it is very much a quarterback rushing friendly. It just rushers in general, like first downs, 0.25 points, the rushing yards, the touchdowns, the passing yards are deducted. I think they're like a point or not even half of what it would considerably be for an entire point for over 100 yards. So there's a lot of weird scoring in the Scott Fish Bowl going on. And it's a super flex league. So yeah, it made those rushing quarterbacks all that more valuable. Big shout out to Scott Fish and Fantasy Cares, a great organization there. But I want to get Chris's thoughts, though, because Chris, Greg says they're going to bounce back. Obviously, you think so, too. You have him ranked at number 1. And whether you're in the Scott Fish Bowl or a typical redraft league, usually the rushing quarterback has a little bit more of an upside, certainly has more of a floor. Josh Allen has been the number 1 quarterback 3 of the last 4 seasons. Jalen Hurts has been up there at number 2 quite often. 2 quarterbacks that can get double-digit rushing touchdowns. Hurts has been doing that pretty consistently. So what is it about this makeup that says to you Mahomes is your number 1 over both of those guys?
I think the consistency, Dan. I think also the lack of turnover around him. There's going to be different coaching staff in the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to see kind of how that adjusts. Is it going to adjust? Jalen Hurts going to get all those push touchdowns. Is Saquon Barkley going to get some of those touchdown opportunities as well? Josh Allen's in an offense in Buffalo that we don't really know what they're going to be. Josh Allen led the league in fantasy scoring when he had a lot of touchdown passes. He had 37 to 1 year. Last year was basically using his legs, which is 15 touchdowns, which was a normality for Josh Allen. Even though he's a big guy, he's not usually rushing for 15 touchdowns like Jalen Hurts is. So there's 2 guys that have question marks above the board where Patrick Mahomes is getting weapons galore added to the thing. We're coming off of 2 seasons ago where he was QB1 without Tyreek Hill, without any of the receivers they just drafted, without Marquise Brown, who they just added to this roster, and Pacheco, a rookie. So now you go to the third year, you have all pieces back, and you got an Andy Reid who loves to throw the ball. So it gives him some toys. You get Patrick Mahomes, who had a career high on rushes attempt last year. Now he is great rushing touchdowns, Dan, but I think that's also going to kind of come back, where it's the first year he did have any rushing touchdowns. The year before he had 4. So if he gets 3 or 4 touchdowns, and this is a guy who had twice gone over 5,000 yards passing, has in between those 2 seasons had 4,800 yards and 4,700 yards, has touchdown galore passing opportunities, 38 touchdowns, 41 touchdowns, 37 the other year. So other than last year, Patrick Mahomes has been the man, and a guy that week in, week out, I can trust in my life, feeling he's going to be competitive with any quarterback you could throw against me.
Well, I'm going to add a little bit something to that. Let's lay out the fact that, last year was his worst year by a number of metrics, right? Worst touchdown rate of his career, 4.5%. Worst passing yards per average at 261. Worst yards per attempt at 7. Air yards is 6.5. Just across the board, it was a down productive season for Patrick Mahomes. Still wins the Super Bowl, but for fantasy purposes, was still a down productive season for Patrick Mahomes. And at the end of the day, still QB 11 on fantasy points per game basis. So I guess my point I'm making there is at the very least, we know that Mahomes' worst is still a top 12 quarterback. So that's where we're not going to be too squeamish about it there. But I do like the weapons they came and brought in. We don't have to talk too much about Patrick Mahomes. We know he's elite. We know he's going to be drafted as one of the top 3 quarterbacks in most year drafts, ADP QB3. Let's talk about somebody that is a little bit more controversial, who may be looking at a little bit more aggression, especially from a fantasy standpoint. That is Justin Herbert. I don't love the offensive system for him from a fantasy standpoint. I love him in the NFL. Like, Chargers are going to have an identity. They have Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, one of the best passing quarterbacks that they've had in their NFL 10 years. Jim Harbaugh going from the 49ers back to college, and we'll see what he's going to come up with now. Greg Roman, we saw what he did with Baltimore with rushing quarterbacks, with Colin Kaepernick back in the day as a rushing quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see how they adjust to having an actual pocket passing quarterback. Love from an NFL standpoint. Don't know how much volume, don't know how much production they're going to have. I'm low on them. I got him at QB 19. Greg, do you think that's too low on a Justin Herbert, who is a very good NFL quarterback, but maybe doesn't have the system, doesn't have necessarily the weapons you're looking for?
Well, in fairness, I don't rank any players. I base my opinion on what I see on the field and what I know about the players and coaches around him. One thing I know about Jim Harbaugh, he wins. He is going to put a winning team on the field for the Chargers. One thing I know about Justin Herbert is he is an outstanding. I mean, how many rookies throw for over 30 touchdowns as a rookie? Herbert did. Okay. Herbert's going to throw more than people think. And I think I saw something where Greg Roman, as an offensive coordinator, has thrown the ball 40 times a game in his history. So it's not like they won't throw the ball. It's going to depend, in my opinion, and we're going to talk about these players later, but it's going to depend on the running game for the Chargers. If the running game cannot dominate, they will throw the ball to move the ball because Harbaugh is going to win. He does what it takes to win. And frankly, I have my opinions about that running game. I think it's going to be okay, but I don't think it's going to be Michigan-esque where you can run the ball the entire second half against a top 10 team and not be stopped. You can't do that in the NFL against any team. So Harbaugh's going to throw the ball. Herbert's going to throw the ball. And I think you're way too low on him. I'm looking at Herbert as a 10 to 12 type guy. But again, I don't really rank him. I got to believe that Chris and Adam aren't that low on him.
Well, we'll get to Adam in there in a second. I just want to throw this out there. Greg Roman's only had one season as a play caller where he was in the top 10 of pass attempts, and it still wasn't 40 pass attempts a game. I mean, he's never been higher than 35 in a single season. That was 2021 with Lamar Jackson with the Baltimore Ravens, and one of the years that people started questioning. Say it again.
Was Lamar Jackson an MVP that year?
No, that was 2019.
Okay.
So it was actually one of Lamar's not so great years. But so let's go to Adam. Adam, because you are a little bit higher than me, but still have him as a QB 16. So probably still not drafting him according to your rankings in redraft 12-man typical leagues unless it's a super flex. So what are you looking at with Justin Herbert?
I'm looking at someone who kind of, to both of your points to a degree, like I expect Justin Herbert to be ridiculously efficient. I just think that they are going to try the run game first. And then I agree. If the run game doesn't work, they're going to do what's best to win and they're going to throw the ball. But I think that they're going to be able to manage to be one of the more run heavy teams in the league, not necessarily, not Michigan. They're not gonna, that's not sustainable at the NFL level. You can't, be that run heavy at the NFL level, but I think they'll be one of the more run heavy NFL offenses. But we've seen that work to a quarterback's favor in a Ryan Tannehill-esque situation. And I am curious if Justin Herbert can be that level of efficient because there's not a lot of examples of it in NFL history, but I think I would expect Justin Herbert to do it before I expected Ryan Tannehill to, just by their own levels of talent. So all of that to say, he's someone who I like if I'm going for more of a gamble as my QB1, but he's not necessarily someone who I'm dying to have as my true QB1. So say if I ended up with an Anthony Richardson and Herbert was falling, that's an awesome pairing for me because I feel like between my two gambles, I'm pretty confident one of them is going to end up hitting. So I do like Justin Herbert a lot as a talent. I like the Chargers a lot kind of going into this season. I'm up in the air as far as the passing volume. I do think that there's potential for upside. I do think that there's a way that Justin Herbert does become a QB1 this season. I'm just not necessarily saying that's the outcome I expect the most.
Well, you're talking about efficiency. My curiosity more comes from where's the efficiency going to happen? Like quarterbacks are efficient. You think of off the rip from last year, Brock Purdy, but he had a ton of weapons. Who's Justin Herbert's weapons? I like Ladd McConkey, but he's still a rookie at the end of the day. Josh Palmer, I don't know if we can make the argument as much more of a jag. There's not a ton of weapons here. And it's not Derrick Henry like Darian Tannehill had behind him to make a play action that uber efficient either. And Herbert's somebody who, from a fantasy perspective, has been up and down over his career. And based off of high volume at 39 pass attempts a game, having Keenan Allen, having Mike Williams, and none of those things are going to be available to him. That's where I struggle with the idea that he has potentially a top 12 quarterback. Greg, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I think you're selling Josh Palmer short. Love Ladd McConkey. I think he may be one of the better rookie wide receivers. I would take McConkey before I would take Marvin Harrison Jr., to be honest. And I know that's a minority opinion, but I don't trust the quarterback.
Kyler Murray.
Murray. Yeah, I don't trust Murray to stay healthy. I don't. And I'm not real big fan of short quarterbacks anyway. I think you're going to see more running out of Herbert than you have in the past. And I think he's going to be more capable of it than people think. But I think all this Harbaugh's going to run. He's got to be able to run to do it. And he will adjust. Because one thing Harbaugh's done everywhere he's been is win. He won in San Francisco. He won in Michigan. And he's going to win in San Diego. And I think the talent in San Diego is much better than it was when he was in San Francisco and in Michigan when he first got there.
Chris, let's get your 2 cents in here.
My 2 things are where the upside in, I think, is what we just, Greg just alluded to, the rushing potential. I do think Justin Herbert's going to be allowed to use his legs. This is a good athlete. This is a guy who it can be, get you a couple touchdowns in the red zone, use his big body, having his big guys in the backfield, Gus Edwards, having, whatever the other running back situation is going to be, having those guys kind of getting attention, Justin Herbert kind of tucking and, bringing it to the end zone himself. And then the efficiency, I think the volume will be a little bit higher than some people expect, because I think this is the NFL where it's not going to be they're going to run a ball 75% of the time or anything like that. And when we look back what Stanford did with Harbaugh with Andrew Luck, I think that's probably the closest comparison, talent-wise, that Harbaugh's had with a similar quarterback. And you didn't see necessarily Stanford open it up and air it all out, but they were very efficient and they were very good in the red zone. They had to get their weapons, their big, tall receivers, the ball in the red zone. One thing you do still have on the Chargers is a couple guys who are pretty big guys. Quentin Johnson's a big guy, adding Disley as a tight end. They had different weapons that I think kind of fit where Justin Herbert can kind of spread the ball around, not necessarily have a number one receiver, similar to Green Bay did last year, but also kind of keep you off guard because you're always kind of expecting the run, but a guy who can push the ball down and throw it anywhere on the field.
Will Disley a weapon? That's got to be the quote of the show right off the bat there. All right, so let's move in the Bo Nix a little bit. Chris, I should say Chris was actually the lowest ranked of us on Justin Herbert. He had him at 21. But just moving in the Bo Nix here, we all have him about the same range. I got him at 32. Chris has got him at 30. Adam's got 31. So, Greg, when you hear all of us in that bottom tier, especially from a fantasy standpoint now that we're talking about, what does that make you think with Bo Nix?
I think he's a rookie quarterback going into a situation that's not great. I don't think you look at JJ, he's going in, he's got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and eventually TJ Hawkinson, plus Aaron Jones, a great receiving back. Bo doesn't have that. Now, I think Bo is a good quarterback, and I think the second half will be much better. If you're in a dynasty league, look to grab Bo in the second half. But I think you guys are ranking him about right for this year. In a redraft, I would not touch Bo Nix.
Yeah, it just seems a little rough, especially after watching Sean Payton. It's been a long time since Sean Payton's called an aggressive offense. I mean, we're talking like Drew Brees prime years. It's been a long time since it's been more in a game managing type offense. Go ahead, Chris.
Dan, can I ask you a question? Though Russell Wilson was a top 10 quarterback last year. Does that make you change your mind at all?
No, because I have to look it up off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure on a points per, it's kind of like the Baker Mayfield effect, where you weren't starting.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Russell Wilson on a week-to-week basis. Well, first of all, total-wise, he was QB 14 last year, so he wasn't a top 10 guy. But in points per game basis, he was QB 16. So it's kind of like the Baker thing, where if you were actually starting Russell Wilson week to week, it wasn't a good thing for you. And a lot of that had to come to do with ridiculous touchdown rates and not much else. Something we'll be talking about when we later on we talk about some of the Broncos' weapons as to why I think they might be falling, and maybe Chris feels a little bit differently. But before we get into running backs, we got to wrap up the quarterback position. And the main question I wanted to ask the panel, starting with Greg, is who will or should start for the Raiders this season, Aidan O'Connell or Gardner Minshew? Now, per request, Greg wanted me to put up this that was on social media earlier today, which is fantastic if you had to read through it. If you're go ahead, Greg.
He's jacked. He's a stud. A woman says, why can't a I find a guy like this. And Gardner reaches out to her and says, hey, Gardner does. And she says, no. And then he says, I'm literally the guy in the pick. So, it's funny. For no other reason, realistically, they brought in Gardner Minshew to start for 2 years to teach Aidan O'Connell how to be a pro. O'Connell had a decent year last year, but not great. Okay. He was top 12, a starter, I think 2 or 3 games. But he was also, he had one game where he finished lower than backup quarterbacks. He had one game with like 1.48 points. And Minshew, when he played, he's got 7 or 8 years experience. He will be the starter this year. Whether we want it or not, he will be the starter unless he just craps the bed in training camp. And I don't see that. I think he sees this as an opportunity. And they paid him $25 million over 2 years. Now, a 2-year contract does not scream long-term answer, but it does scream, let's teach the kid how to play. So I think Minshew starts.
It's yes, they went out of their way to sign him. $25 million. That's backup money. That's not even starter money either. Not that O'Connell's making
more. Dan, who's making more?
I'm going to say not that Aidan O'Connell's making more, being that he is a rookie, 100%. And I think the idea is that Gardner Minshew would at least compete for the job and be favored for it. But I'm going to get Adam in here after I kind of set this up a little bit, because O'Connell and Minshew really were the same quarterback from a statistical standpoint last season. Both their 17-game paces were roughly 3,500 yards, 21 touchdowns, 9 interceptions for O'Connell, 3,800 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions for Minshew. I mean, their efficiency across the board were similar. True completion percentage ranked 21st for Minshew. His deep ball completion percentage, 37th ranked. Meanwhile, you have O'Connell was 23rd in those areas. So everything was pretty much in line here, where O'Connell and Minshew were very, very similar across the board in a lot of these metrics. So, Adam, with that in mind, what's your mindset here?
2 things. I think that it's split. I think it should be O'Connell. I'm pretty confident it will be Minshew. In the past, we've seen Getsy as a guy that is willing to go pretty heavy into the read option. And there's one thing that Gardner Minshew does at above a C. It's the read option. He's very good at it. Actually, one of the most efficient in the NFL last league. Awful in most other categories, but one of the most efficient specifically within read option last year. So with that, I think with Getsy, that could be kind of the thought process that, like, if we can eke out that we'll be okay. But look, I think we know what Gardner Minshew is at this point. He's a very solid backup quarterback. You really don't want to see him throw the ball too much. And if he's your identity on offense, then dear Lord, good luck. So if it was me, I think you should see what you have in Aidan O'Connell. I think more than likely it's the exact same thing, kind of as the stats you just pointed out alluded to. But these are NFL coaches, and they're typically more worried about keeping their jobs this season than they are, the long-term future of the franchise. So with that, I think it's going to be Gardner Minshew.
Ryan Fitzpatrick part 2.
Yeah, right. And the part 2 of Ryan Fitzpatrick was not great. Like, instead of Ryan Fitzpatrick was not very good. Just kind of want to lay that. Honestly, the biggest difference between O'Connell and Minshew was that O'Connell had the best red zone completion percentage in the league. And we're looking at Gardner Minshew, who was 21st. It just wasn't good. It just wasn't good, period. I just wouldn't. I'm with you, Greg, on the idea that Minshew's probably going to start week 1, but I don't know if I'm with the idea that he's actually an improvement in any kind of capacity over Aidan O'Connell, quite frankly, even what we saw as a rookie. Everything kind of measures out there. Chris, what were you going to say real quick?
Actually, I think O'Connell's going to start because it makes more sense to me that Minshew's that spark plug as Ryan Fitzpatrick off the bench, a guy that you can kind of bring into the game week 3, week 4, Raiders are struggling, and then you can bench O'Connell but not kill his psyche in a sense where he's still young, he's still can repair. But you start Minshew, go to O'Connell, there's nowhere else to go back to. So that's why I think there might be, if O'Connell doesn't screw it up in a sense, I think he's got a good chance to start.
That's a fair point, too. Let's go into running backs because we got a lot to talk about. And we have our first showdown that we want to get to in this one. Okay, so the showdown here is over Isiah Pacheco. Chris and I have him ranked in two different tiers. Greg's going to judge our debates and see which one he agrees with more and where he falls on the Pacheco value of it all, too. I have him at 16. Chris has him at 8. So a mid-level RB2 to a mid-level RB1. So, Chris, why are you so confident in Pacheco cracking that top 8 this year?
First, I'm trying to figure out why you hate one of your own Rutgers players, Dan. I mean, there's very few of them in the NFL, so give them some props. But I think Isiah Pacheco is one of those last cutoff guys when you get to the actual bell cow back opportunities. There's a lot of different guys who talk about being a bell cow back, but he actually has the opportunity to be that guy. CHE is the only guy kind of there right now on the roster. They have a bunch of undrafted free agents backing him up. No McKinnon. And we saw without McKinnon, it was only a 4-game stretch, but he had over 100 yards and 20 touches per game. He's a guy who's been highly efficient in the passing attack. It was very efficient last year as well. So the increased opportunities didn't necessarily decrease his efficiency in the passing attack. And you saw a guy who had 9 total touchdowns. And in a Chiefs offense that we all thought really struggled, we all talked about Patrick Mahomes and he struggles. This offense is going to be much more opportunistic in scoring and opportunistic with that of having guys not being 8 or 9 men in the box. You're going to have respect for Marquise Brown on the outside and Xavier Worthy on the outside and Travis Kelce and Rice and name all different other guys in the passing attack. And then forgot about Pacheco coming out of the backfield, forgot about Pacheco getting the draws, forgot about Pacheco getting opportunity to get 15, 20 touches and just have soft fronts to run against. So I think all those things add up to a guy that can be an RB1 option for you. I think RB14 last year in half-point PPR. So I think we're going to see an increase from that. And I think that you're going to see a guy that, barring injury, now injury is a tough thing because his running style kind of bars itself to that. But a guy who should go over 1,000 yards, continue to be involved in the passing attack, and one of the most potent offenses in football.
Yeah, there's a couple key points in your argument that I'm going to pretty much highlight as to why I am not as big on him, why I think he is more of a mid-level RB2 here. You laid it out. The offense last year was not as good, but it was also more run-dependent than we've seen the Chiefs' offense be in recent history, and he still could only be the RB15 on a points per game. Excuse me, as I get the frog out of my throat here. On top of it, you have a guy that, so while he was more featured than he would have been, and Jerick McKinnon was out of the picture, not producing top 12 numbers, from week 9 on, he was very good, Chris. McKinnon misses a few games, 69% of the team carries, 11% target share. But the one thing that was interesting to me during that stretch, in particular between weeks 13 through 18, while Claude Edwards-Helaire seemingly had been left out for dead, he started to work his way into that third down role during that last quarter part of the season. In fact, gaining to the point where he was getting an 11% target share as well, the same as Pacheco. His 17-game pace would have been 51 targets over that little stretch. Signaling
as they close to the playoffs.
Hold on, signaling potentially that they could potentially be open to the idea that Clyde Edwards-Helaire works in on passing downs, which is what I had profiled him to be coming out of college to begin with. I wouldn't be that surprised if Andy Reid decided, you know what, we'll give him a shot to kind of play a little bit of that McKinnon role as we got to see in the last quarter part of the season. And he also had the 7th most red zone touches. Here's what's interesting about that. The Chiefs have always been a pass-heavy red zone team, right? You got Patrick Mahomes, you want the ball in his hands and the most money part of the field. Last year was a huge increase where they ran the ball 42% of their red zone attempts inside the 10, where previous years they had been 38% or less in rushing. If we have all these weapons and we think Patrick Mahomes is going to have this big resurgence to being the Patrick Mahomes of old, I don't see Pacheco getting the same amount of opportunities in the red zone that he was just based off of that. I think, but to your point, as far as a workhorse role, I think he's got a great, strong RB2 floor. But I do not see a player who has a special potential, a special talent to be a top 12 player. He had every opportunity last year and still couldn't do it. Go ahead, give your rebuttal real quick.
Was Kareem Hunt bad for this Chiefs offense when he was healthy and playing for the
Kareem
Chiefs?
Hunt was a more elite player than Pacheco was. And actually, the most important, thank you for saying that, because the most important thing that just reminded me that you said it too. Pacheco's rushing style has already led to back and shoulder issues. That does need to factor in when you're ranking a guy who's not going to change his running style. And it's going to be his 3rd year in his league. I don't know if he can hold up playing the way that he does. While it's fun on the watch. I don't know if he can hold up that long. Go ahead, Greg. Judge who you want in this debate and where you fall on Pacheco's stat line.
All right. So the Pacheco, in my heart, I want Chris to be right because he's my RB2 in Scott Fish. Okay. But taking that aside, I have to judge his spirit. So I look at Pacheco and I think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not really a huge drain on his touches. I see Pacheco as a third-year emerging running back who is going to get better, learn the game better. And that said, I think the two of you have kissed your sisters. Now, I don't know if you have sisters or not, but I graded it as a tie. You both made excellent points. It could go either way, and I hate ties, but I don't think either one of you won the argument. So I'm going to defer. Adam, I know you're not grading this, and I know you have your own feelings on Pacheco, but you heard their arguments now. Do you think that they were that disparate, or do you think that it was a tie in the argument case?
I think it was, I think both arguments are pretty strong. And look, I'm more or less right in the middle between you two as well. So you're going to have to look elsewhere for a real answer because I have him ranked right there at 14, knocking on the door of 13. I could go either way there. So.
I just say CHE didn't steal his job in the playoffs. So Dan can give that stretch all he wants from week 13 to week 18. The Chiefs were resting themselves to the playoffs. It's also a Chiefs team that lost on Christmas Day. So I wouldn't necessarily judge what they were doing there, but I would look at the playoff stretch and I saw Pacheco as being the man in the backfield.
Yeah,
I think the offense is going to be better. But again, you have the injury. I think that third year is an emerging year for a lot of players in the NFL. And I do think that if he plays a whole season, Chris probably has a little bit of an edge, but I don't know that he will play a whole season because of his running style. And in that case, Dan could be right. If he goes out and misses 5 or 6 games, Dan's going to be right. But if he plays the whole season, I'm not sure he makes 8 anyway, because there are going to be running backs that are going to be elevated in scoring, at least in Scott Fish, because of the new kickoff rules. The new kickoff rules are going to impact regular leagues too, because your starting field position is going to be better than it has been in the past. The fact that the kicking team cannot leave the 35 until the ball is in the hands of the receiver or hits the ground gives the returning team a 15 to 20-yard head start. There's no way they don't have better field positions to start drives this year.
Greg, I'm glad you made that point about it. And I don't want to get too much of a tangent here because we still have a lot to cover. But with the new kickoff rules, there are people like you're talking about the Scott Fishbowl in particular because of the scoring in there. But just in general, it's a new rule. It's going to, and people are going to be curious about heading into the NFL this season. And I just want to throw this out there. Starting running backs are still not going to be involved in kickoffs. Let's be real. Coaches do not want to put extra wear and tear on their starting running backs, even in these situations. So when people are asking me about return games and these elite running backs as Chris McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley or, going to be returning kicks, emphatically no. But what I am glad that you brought up within that was the idea that the field position could be a lot better, which may lead to being more favorable for coaches to want to run the football, especially early downs. So I do like that aspect of it. Just wanted to point that out. Let's get into Zamir Whibbs. Zamir Whibbs. I don't even know where that came from. Zamir White here. And this is a guy who's kind of interesting to me, right? Because I could make an argument based on what we got to see in the 4 games that he started that maybe this guy has a lot more potential than what we're necessarily willing to give him credit for. I mean, Adam, Chris, and I all have him either as a back-end RB2, high-end RB3. We're all pretty much kind of in the same range. On the flip side, we only saw it for 4 games. It's a small sample size. It wasn't a guy coming in with screaming high draft capital and not a offense that necessarily makes you feel uber confident in what it's going to be able to put up this season either. So, Greg, when you look at Zamir White, what are your expectations?
I expect him to be high-end RB2. Everything depends on scoring system. It really does. I don't expect him to be a 60 reception running back. But if he can get 30 to 40 receptions, which I think is possible, I do think that he can edge up in that 12 to 14 range because he is a bell cow. And I think the coaching staff saw enough that they didn't really push to keep Josh Jacobs, who is a superb running back. So I like Zamir White because you can draft him so late and still get a guy. Remember, Najee Harris was a top 3 running back his rookie or second year based on volume. Zamir White is going to get volume, but everything depends on your scoring system. Half point PPR, half PPR, I think he's going to be very good. And in no PPR, I think he's going to be even better.
Yeah, I mean, he's going as RB23 right now in ADP. Adam, what are you seeing as Zamir White? What are you thinking?
I'm really torn on Zamir White because I agree. You look at those games and actually the efficiency numbers within those games, not just like yards per carry, but like yards after contact, his elusiveness, all these things actually, I mean, small sample size, sure, but in the same offense, he far outperformed Josh Jacobs in those categories. He was definitely doing more after contact. He was definitely more explosive. Like, there's no doubt about it. So on one hand, I'm like, I think you can be a genuinely good running back, and I didn't dislike Zamir White. I believe in the class that he came out. It was towards the back end, but he was in my top 5, and I did like Zamir White. And there's some things that he does do pretty well at an NFL level. Problem is, I just really hate having running backs who are on bad offenses, and I have a problem with this offense just kind of on the whole. I mean, I talked about something earlier why I think it could be Gardner with Getsy. That doesn't mean I like Getsy, right? I just think he has a tendency to do those things. I don't think he's a good offensive coordinator. I like that the Raiders seem to be a team with good chemistry, and maybe that can work out. But looking at this offense on paper, it's hard to be optimistic about really anyone outside of Davante Adams for me. And that's the guy who I'm like, all right, volume will probably prevail and it'll be fine. But everyone else, I just have a really hard time. So I do have him just barely outside of my RB2. I do think he's worth a gamble at that range because I think the upside is there. I think he's a talented player. I do think he'll get volume. I actually, kind of to your point, Greg, I think that he'll be sneaky on third downs because I actually think he could compete with Amir Abdullah as far as a pass blocker specifically. If they plan to throw to the running back, I think it'll be between Lauby or Abdullah. Let's not get it twisted. But I think he could find himself on the field on third downs just as a pure pass blocker. I think he did do a fairly good job at that at Georgia. At least I graded him much better in that category than Lauby at the very least. We'll see what happens with Abdullah. But nonetheless, he's an interesting guy. I think he is right around an RB2 for me in the low end, but I think he's worth a gamble.
Yeah, it's just the tier that he's kind of falling in, right? Like he's again ADP RB23. James Conner's right behind him according to ADP. Raheem Mostert's still down at 27. Tony Pollard, we've talked about on this show. We kind of like him. He's at 29. So there's just other guys I feel like have more potential in their game than Zamir White does, and it makes it kind of hard to value him anymore. But his volume should give him a floor of an RB2. Let's talk about another guy who I'm torn on, because I wasn't torn on him initially, but all of the hoopla coming out of the Denver Broncos camp has me questioning, okay, well, exactly what is this role supposed to be? And I'm not even 100% sure now. And that's Javonte Williams. I look at Javonte Williams, I look at that backfield. There's no doubt in my mind who the best running back in that backfield is. It's Javonte, especially on a 3-down skill set. I don't think that's a question. McLaughlin, he can, be a little compliment, be a little spark plug. That's fine. It's not a guy who's going to get more than 10 touches in a Sean Payton offense in any given game. Audric Estime, I don't think that was a pick to made for this year, and I still have a lot of questions about what he can even be from an NFL standpoint. They're talking about a guy who ran a 4.7 and only knows how to run straight, has no wiggle in his game whatsoever between the tackles. I'm not really big on an Audric Estime, and Samaje Perine. We know what Samaje Perine is. He's there to block on third down. Like that's it, plain and simple. So I think it's definitely Javonte Williams. So I have him ranked at 26, which is the highest of this panel as of now. But there's a lot of talk about Javonte. Maybe the team is soured on him. I don't know, Greg. How are you reading this situation?
I've heard he may not even get out of camp. He may be cut. Now, whether that's true or not, the thing we have to remember is he had a 3 ligament tear 2 years ago. Okay. You don't come back from that first year. That's why I'm not high on Brooks in Carolina. Brooks is going to be fine in Dynasty. I don't want him this year because in a redraft, I think you don't come back that first year from a 3 ligament tear. It's a tough
Greg,
thing.
just to be clear, Jonathan Brooks had an ACL injury that was more in line with Breece Hall, not Javonte Williams. It was a clean ACL tear. It was not a multi-ligament tear. Just to make sure you got that information out there.
But my point is that you don't get confidence. The injury heals in 9 months. Talk to Jesse Morris, fantasy doctors. He's a surgeon. He's an orthopedic specialist. I talked to this guy. He says he doesn't think Chubb will play this year. If he does, it'll be late in the year. I feel the same way. So I'm looking at Javonte Williams. Either he's done or he should be back to what he was. If he's back to what he was, you guys are all way too low on him. But with rumors that he won't make it out of camp, I'm drafting Jaleel McLaughlin. You don't think he'll get more than 10 carries? I think he may have to because he's the most dynamic back in that backfield last year in terms of efficiency. So it's not a backfield I want a lot of, but if I'm looking for that RB5 on my roster, I'm not afraid to take him.
Yeah, here's the thing with Jaleel McLaughlin. I mean, we're talking about a guy who really only had 2 games where he was relevant at all, and it gets really kind of overhyped. And he didn't have a 100-yard rushing game at all the entire season. He only had 2 games where he was over 50 yards rushing. The only reason he even wound up on our fantasy radar at all because he had 2 games where he had 2 touchdowns in those games. Outside of that, he did absolutely nothing. Like there's a perception about Jaleel McLaughlin. I think it's over portrayed here quite a bit, and he's not.
His analytics was good though.
You
gotta give him that. His analytics numbers were good.
Yeah, it was good, but also let's look at it again. 10 touches. I think the most he had was 12 touches in a single game. We know how Sean Payton operates. That ain't the type of guy he's running out there most of the time. If anything, if Javonte Williams does get cut, then I would say probably Audric Esme is getting the nod on early downs. That's just how he rolls and how he's done it since forever. Even with the Alvin Kamara days, he still had Mark Ingram to take on the early down role, and Alvin Kamara was a special talent. I just don't buy into it. I don't think Javonte's going to wind up getting cut, but there's a lot of smoke. Sometimes there's fire. Chris, go ahead and give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a rotational thing. I think this is going to go back to the heyday of Sean Payton when he had Deuce McAllister. After Deuce McAllister's injury, rotating different backs. They had Pierre Thomas, they had Darren Sproles, they had Mike Bell. So they're rotating 4 guys deep, and I think you're going to see the same thing again this year. You saw similar things at receiver. I think Sean Payton's back to I'm going to create my offense in a sense. He's going to put different guys out there, different packages, different personnel groupings, and keep mixing it up. So I think it's going to be hard to kind of find that RB1. Now, Javonte has upside there because I'm with Greg on this, that the second year after your injury is usually when you get back in your explosiveness. And what I have heard outside of camp things, when Javonte was on the field and practicing, they did see the explosiveness returning. So that's the key thing. I think that, if you're getting a guy that has explosiveness and you hear good things coming out of camp, then you have a guy that you probably can value as a RB3, RB4 option. Otherwise, he's a guy that you're kind of just sitting there, and if he's left in late rounds, why not take a shot on him? Because he's somebody who could wind up being something. Just depending on other guys get hurt too. P. Ryan's had injury history. Estamine has an injury history. So these guys all have injury histories as well. So it can be Javonte could be a guy that doesn't really cost you anything, but could be a good guy to have on your team moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you laid it out. That's why I'm the highest ranked on this board right now at 26, looking to move him higher because when he's a year removed from the injury, Javonte Williams was an explosive running back. If he's getting an explosion back, I believe in the talent that he is. To your point, though, also ADP RB30, 96 overall. There's no reason not to take a shot on him because after you get out of that tier, you're not really getting a whole lot of running backs who have a ton of upside anyway with the touches they might have. Let's dive in, though, real quickly to the Chargers backfield. So, Greg, help me out here. You're a Michigan guy. You get Jim Harbaugh. He's over on the Chargers. They get Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, who, of course, know the Greg Roman system. And then you have, day 3 pick Kamani Vidal, who might mix in. A lot of fantasy people are, excited about him because of the potential of really just the unknown. That's what it is. We know what Gus Edwards is. We know J.K. Dobbins can't stay healthy. Vidal's just the unknown, and that's why people get excited about him. So how are you reading this backfield right now?
I'm drafting Vidal almost everywhere I'm drafting, and I'm drafting him because I get him late. He's my RB6, so I can cut him if I need to. Gus Edwards is 29. Okay. 29-30 is generally the cutoff for running backs. Now, I know that Raheem Mostert's 33 and he had a pretty good year last year, but it's rare. It's very rare for a running back to last that long. And Gus Edwards never had more than 200 carries in the season. So Gus Edwards is not a bell cow. I don't think he's ever had 1,000 yards, maybe once, but I don't think he's had 1,000. And 3 years in a row, and how many running backs in the history of the NFL have come back from a torn Achilles? I'm not talking about the ACL. I'm worried about the Achilles. There have been a couple that have come back, but none of them have ever regained the explosiveness they had before they tore the Achilles. I think Cam Akers was the last guy that came back from an Achilles tear and had a reasonably decent year, but it wasn't a spectacular year. So what do we know about Kimnai Vidal? We know he's a small school guy. We know he's compact, like 5'9" and 215. That's a good build. That's a sturdy build. We know that he's hard to tackle, but he's not real elusive. He's just hard to bring down. So he's a Jim Harbaugh type back. I mean, if you look at Jim Harbaugh, who did he like the last 2 years? Hassan Haskins, who was very hard to tackle, and Blake Corum, who is a 5'9", 205-pound guy that is very strong and hard to tackle. I think Kimnai Vidal gets the starting job, if not week 1, by week 3. And I think that he's going to be the bell cow back in that system. So I love him, especially at value.
We'll have to see. He's still a 6th-round pick who's very questionable in pass protection, and so is Gus Edwards. And that's what makes this whole thing murky, in my opinion. Gus Edwards isn't going to give you anything in the passing game. We know that. He doesn't even play on third downs because he's been a terrible pass protector his entire career. Vidal has those similar questions as a 6th-round rookie coming out of Troy. J.K. Dobbins would be the quote-unquote best pass catcher, but again, coming off an Achilles injury, I don't know what we're even kind of J.K. Dobbins we're going to see. So this whole backfield, in my opinion, is a complete mess, which, to your point, I think makes Vidal the more intriguing fantasy guy because you can draft him 1 ADP RB 49. So again, if you take him, you can easily cut him. It's not like he's killing your team, and everything else is such in flux that maybe he finds a pathway. I don't think it's going to be as soon as you say, unless there's an injury, but at some point in the second half of the season, it could be right there. I want to dive right into these wide receivers, and now I'm going to kick this right over to you. Davante Adams, you have him at wide receiver 9. You mentioned him earlier. You're big on him, even though, I mean, last year he had all the volume last year, wasn't still great for him. So what makes you more confident this year?
I do think going back to Minshew, going back to the RPO, going back to the get see it evolve, the whole thing, I think the only way this offense works, and I'm just really banking on them figuring this out, is that it's a RPO, 1 read, and that 1 read is Davante Adams. Otherwise, it's Zamir White getting the ball. I think Minshew can make that work. I think Adams can make that work. I really don't see another pathway for this offense to function. I mean, obviously, you can't run RPO every play, but that has to be like the backbone and the identity for this thing to function in any capacity. Like, genuinely, like, I don't see another pathway. That's why, I mean, I think I still had him the highest, and it's another guy we're talking about, but Jakobi Meyers, I had him the highest in this panel, and I still couldn't put him any higher. You know, I've loved Jakobi Meyers for years. Like his whole NFL career, I've been on the Jakobi Meyers table, but I still can't even argue him as anything more than the back of your roster because the only way this offense functions is if you funnel it between Zamir White and Davante Adams. So I think that's what they'll do. It's the only way you're going to build any true identity in this offense. Otherwise, you're just hoping that the defense can carry the whole thing, which realistically is what's going to happen. But I just don't see any other way, I guess, is really what it boils down to. I don't see any other way than building this offense around Davante Adams. He's your only really, like, maybe this is a little harsh, on the offensive side of the ball. He's your only B or higher player you've got. So you got to use him.
Well, look, the passing game is going to funnel through Davante first. I don't think there's any question about that. And most times, fantasy owners, if I told you your receiver was going to get 175 targets, he was going to get a 33% team target share, and he's going to get you, 8+ touchdowns, you'd be thrilled. But even with all of that Adams did have, and he had 100 receptions to go along with it, still only the wide receiver 18 on a fantasy points per game basis. It was just so brutal. It was like pulling teeth to get production on a week in, week out basis, even with them over targeting him. And the biggest reason why was because of the ridiculous low ADOT of 10.8, which is by far the lowest in his career. Second lowest mark in yards per target is 6.5, which I think the lowest one was back in his rookie season. We weren't sure if Davante Adams was actually going to be a good receiver yet. And it's been 4 years since Adam had fallen short of getting double-digit touchdowns. I've already laid out how I don't think Gardner Minshew is necessarily an improvement upon this. The only thing I think Adams has going for him is that, well, you get Luke Getsy, who did have success with you, featuring you in the past. That's the only silver lining I could find. As far as the Meyers thing, the biggest thing I think that hurts Meyers is not so much the offense as Brock Bowers coming into play and running around the same routes. That's why I'm not as big on Meyers. Greg, give me your quick thoughts on Davante Adams.
I think he's a star. I think he's quarterback proof. And I do think Minshew's going to start and be better for him than O'Connell because 6 years experience is better than one. And bottom line is that he's seen more in his time. And when you only have one receiver, you're going to go to that guy, and that's going to be Davante Adams.
Yeah, wasn't quarterback proof last year, so we'll have to see. I mean, it wasn't terrible. It was wide receiver too, but for ADP wise, for where he finished is what the disappointment comes in.
Yeah, but Dan, most leagues start 3 wide receivers, or at least 2 with a couple flexes. That's still a good player. And what's his ADP now?
ADP
I'm not worried about last year. I'm worried about this year.
Yeah, his ADP is wide receiver 13 now, which is where I have him ranked. I'm okay with his ADP currently. I just don't think this is a top. I take that back. I'm sorry. His ADP is wide receiver 10. I don't think he's a top 12 receiver right now with the way this offense is, with the way this quarterback play is constituted.
Well, and he may not be, but he's going to be close. I don't think he's a wide receiver 30. I think
that's the argument we're making here. Remember, we're talking about.
But that's my point is when you're drafting these guys, whether they finish 10 or 14, doesn't matter. They're still starters.
Sure.
They're still a starter on your fantasy squad. And he's going to be a starter for somebody's fantasy squad.
What we don't want to do, and even if they are a starter on your fantasy squad, is guys underperforming their ADPs, which is where we have to be careful with the value, which is more of the argument that I'm making here. But again, his ADP is not too far off of where I have him ranked. We do know he has a floor of a wide receiver too. I want to move into some of the Charger receivers a little bit. Chris, I want to get your opinion on this because you are the highest ranked of me and Adam on Ladd McConkey. And I do love McConkey. I want to have the cojones that you do to put him in the top 36. Part of my issue, and I want Chris, I want to see if you agree or disagree with this. Part of my issue is that the closest example I think we saw was Marquise Brown with Greg Roman, right? His rookie year, 2019, Marquise Brown outside of Mark Andrews was the number 1 wide receiver on that team, even as a rookie. And he still had actually a 27% target share. The problem was it's a Greg Roman offense, and a 27% target share only led to 71 targets on the season. So you're talking about probably the equivalent of like a 17% target share on another team. Again, like McConkey a lot as a rookie, but what is his volume really? And is he definitely the number 1 receiver in your book for this team?
Well, I mean, I think eventually he becomes number 1 receiver for this team. I don't know if he starts off the season as such. I don't disrespect Josh Palmer. I think Josh Palmer is a competent receiver, and he's got a rapport with Justin Herbert off the bat. So I think that'll pay some dividends. But overall, I think Ladd McConkey is a replacement for Keenan Allen. We saw much Justin Herbert loved throwing to Keenan Allen over the last few years. We also know that looking at Greg Roman, he talked about the Ravens days. Let's highlight the 49ers and Bills days. When he had a receiver 1 in Greg Roman's offense, is a guy who commands about 27-31% of the target share on average. That's what we saw. And usually that average winds up being about 115 targets to 120 targets. Is Michael Crabtree for a couple of years, it was Antoine Bolden for a couple of years. In Buffalo, it was Sammy Watkins. Now, the key thing, Dan, you're kind of alluding to is that second receiver Only once for Greg Roman's career has he had that second receiver have over 100 targets as well. Bolden, Crabtree did the 1 year. But other than that, hasn't seen a second receiver going over 100. But you've seen it get around 80 to 90. I say all that because as receiver one, if McConkey takes that role by the end of this season, sees about 115, 120 targets, the 27, 31% target share, which is the receiver one sees in Greg Roman's offense, that's going to be a guy who's going to probably follow a top 36 for you and has more upside for that because I think a guy who's very talented, you can line up inside, outside, you can move around and be a red zone threat as well. So I think for me, I look at McConkey as a guy who's a lot of upside, but also a safe floor because he's a guy who can consistently get open. He can sit in soft zones, and he's going to be a guy who's sits in that slot position that we know is going to be featured in that offense.
Yeah, I like the argument. I do. I haven't watched for 39. I'm not that far off. It's just that the rookie and Greg Roman and everything else that comes with it. And you're also talking about Ladd McConkey, who's coming off of a season where he had to miss a few games due to injury. Where is he at exactly coming back? I don't know if he's somebody you're loving in the month of September. I do think he's somebody you're liking in the second half of the season, though. I'm kind of with you on that one. Greg, I'm going to get to you because I want to move on here. And this is a big question. Which of the Kansas City Chief receivers do you want the most, whether it's because you think they're going to perform the best or because you think they have the best value?
Well, I think Rashee Rice is clearly the best receiver, but he could be going 8 games. You just don't know because we don't know the legal situation. So I'm drafting Hollywood Brown. I think Marquise Brown is probably the best receiver of those guys there. Xavier Worthy has had some issues. I'll draft him, but he's going to be real late for me. So for me, I think Hollywood Brown is going to build a rapport with Mahomes. It's the best quarterback he's ever had. And if he has a couple big games early, then Rashee Rice coming back may not matter.
Yeah, Adam, how are you looking at this? I want to get your opinion on this one.
I'm still kind of playing this by ear. I think I'm going to be drafting a lot of redraft. I'm going to really like these Chiefs wide receivers. I'm really hoping for some more information because not only the Rashee Rice thing, right? I need to know how these receivers are actually lining up because Hollywood Brown is a wide receiver who, again, on this show, he's like Jakobi Meyers. I've been a Hollywood Brown guy this whole time. Hey, if you're the guy getting all the targets, I love you. I love Hollywood Brown, right? I can't stand when teams make Hollywood Brown try to play an X. I'm really scared that the Chiefs are going to try to make Hollywood Brown play the X. And I want to be high on Hollywood Brown with Patrick Mahomes because absolutely it's the best quarterback he's ever had. This is an awesome opportunity for Hollywood Brown. I'm really excited for him. But man, it's terrifying, the thought. So, look, we get into training camp. First 10 plays that they finally do 11 on 11. I see him, 7 of those plays. He's in the flanker. I'm sold. I'm high on him. We're in it to win it in redraft. But I'm just holding my breath until I see it. I really am. I just need to know kind of what the usage is going to be. If we get kind of Rashee Rice and Kelce kind of doing the slot type things, obviously the Rashee Rice thing is just another bomb that we can throw in this situation. I just think there's a lot of ways that we can go wrong. They're trying to get all 3 receivers and Kelce on the field. That just kind of forces Hollywood to the X. I suppose we'll see. I love the upside, and even at cost, I think it's a dart I'm willing to throw. It's just how much do I love it is the question that I guess we're going to see here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the nice thing about it is that none of these receivers are going that high, right? I mean, but Rashee Rice's ADP's at 30, Marquise Brown's at 27, and then Xavier Worthy is down at 48 right now. So with those 3 in mind, you're going to get value, I think, no matter who you choose from. The Rashee Rice thing, I got him at 38. It's impossible to know. It's impossible to know until we know what the suspension is, and that's just what makes it completely and utterly hard. But I will say his ADP right now, if we're in a draft and we still don't know come August, I'm hoping we know by then, but let's say we still don't know by come August and he's getting drafted as wide receiver 40, then that's the guy I'm pulling the trigger on. So it's kind of one of those situations going on with Kansas City where it's hard to know, but I do like the upside of any player. Here's what I'm going to throw in real fast. Not big on jumping on Xavier Worthy a round or two early, like some people have kind of put out there. Rookie receivers do not do great in Andy Reid's system. Even Rice took it till the second half of the year to become a regular starter, and they had nobody. We're talking MVS, Mecole Hardman. Like, it literally had to be by default is what happened there. So, yeah, not loving that. But we do have a showdown to get in. It's Chris and I, again, battling over Cortland Sutton this time. And we have a much wider gap in this one. So Chris has Cortland Sutton ranked at wide receiver 38. I have him at wide receiver 54. Greg, you're going to go ahead and judge this. Chris, go ahead and make your argument why Sutton is still a borderline bottom end wide receiver 3.
Look, I know everybody's going to talk about touchdown regression for Cortland Sutton. He scored 10 touchdowns last year. It's going to be impossible for him to score 10 touchdowns again this year. But when we start talking about the regression, let's not go too crazy where it should probably maybe fall a couple touchdowns, maybe 6, 7, 8 range. That's not out of realistic that he can score 7 or 8 touchdowns. It's not crazy. Cortland Sutton scores 7 or 8 touchdowns. But what could also happen for Cortland Sutton is he could have more than 800 or 700 something yards last year. I think Cortland Sutton right now is the only receiver that we know that's going to be on the field for sure on this Denver offense. We saw Marvin Mims be a guy who, we thought was going to be rotated in and out last year, but we don't really know his roles. That's what it's going to be. They went out and got more guys that they did the backfield at receiver. And as long as Cortland Sutton doesn't get himself traded or doesn't hold out through the regular season, he's going to be that number receiver 1. I'm not a Bo Nix fan. I'm not going to sit here and preach that Bo Nix is going to be good. But usually the rookie quarterback throws to the receiver 1. That's usually their primary read. That's usually who they pepper with the most targets. That's usually who they look for in the red zone. That's usually their safety blanket. It's also the guy that they're going to look for that when you have a Bo Nix and, Cortland Sutton, it's going to be an offense that's very simplified, I think. We saw this kind of with Teddy Bridgewater and Michael Thomas back in New Orleans. It was an explosive offense, but it was set up very simply that we run the ball and we throw 7 or 8 yard passes to our big, tall receiver. Cortland Sutton's probably going to be that guy. I know Tony Franklin. It was a guy that was, drafted, but we saw. I bring him up because I think not necessarily we could do this year, but we saw Bo Nix have, actual success going to Tony Franklin in college. Cortland Sutton has a similar skill set in a sense where he's a guy, a big, long, lanky guy. He's able to stretch the field, a guy who's able to attack the ball when it's in the air. So I think there's a lot of things that kind of add up decently for Cortland Sutton. I'm not saying he's going to be a guy that's, going to be a world beater, but 38, I think, is pretty fair for a receiver 1 on this roster.
Yeah, I mean, you can try to dismiss that touchdown regression all you want to, but that's a real issue here. 10 touchdowns last season. His previous high was 6 in his career. And even with the 10 touchdown season, was still only the wide receiver 36. So he needed a normal amount of scores in order to even put himself as a top 3 wide receiver. And you're only ranking him 2 spots lower. If he does,
he also didn't play 2 games in the season.
Down to 6. We're not talking about lower. We're talking about 6 touchdowns of where he was before. He didn't have 100 targets. He didn't even have 800 yards. He's never had more than 900 yards in a single season.
He has 1,000 yards in a season before.
2019. I'm sorry. He hasn't more than 900 yards since 2019. So it's been 5 years since he's even had more than 900 yards. That was my stat there. My correction. My bet on that one. But in last year, you have Russell Wilson, who has a history of throwing bombs, throwing red zone targets to an outside perimeter wide receiver. Bo Nix doesn't have that history. He's called Captain Checkdown for a reason coming out of college. Troy Franklin, most of his targets were intermediate over the middle. I don't know when Cortland Sutton hasn't been running that route tree in forever, and he sure as hell didn't do it last year with Sean Payton either. He made him an X receiver and kept him out there on the perimeter. I don't like that for Bo Nix at all whatsoever. I don't see him being able to replicate his obscene touchdown rate from last season. He doesn't have much of a higher ceiling than 100 targets and 800 yards, no matter who the quarterback has been for the majority of his career outside of 1 year, and he hasn't been that guy in 5 seasons. Greg, go ahead and judge.
Okay, well, I do believe you both made good points. All right. Sutton, he did have a big year, and he's probably going to regress some, but he's a big receiver, and the tight end isn't that great in Denver. Now, I know we're going to talk about him a little later, but frankly, quarterbacks that are rookies tend to have the field shortened for them. A lot of times they only read half the field rather than the full field, and they tend to focus on one receiver. So a lot of it's going to depend on whether Sutton is the one receiver that they focus on. I kind of like Mims, but he's going to be, if things hold true, he'll be the return guy. So he may only be in on three receiver sets. So to me, I think Chris wins this one, but it's because you're both low on Sutton and somebody's going to catch the balls in Denver. And so I think Sutton is probably going to be the wide receiver one in Denver, but I don't think anybody's going to go out of their way to draft him early. So Chris, you win, but it's not a smashing victory because, I mean, what, you said 38 for him? So it's not like you're expecting him to be a top 12 guy.
No, but even at 38, I mean, who else? We got other guys going in that draft. We have Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Rashee Rice, Christian Watson, Jordan Addison, McConkey. Those are guys being drafted in that territory. There's no way you're drafting Cortland Sutton over any one of those guys I just mentioned. No chance.
I would.
Over who?
Rashee Rice. You don't know if he's going to miss half the year. I mean, right now you're taking a huge risk drafting Rashee Rice at any point. I would. Again, volume is the key. Opportunity is king in fantasy football. Who is going to take the opportunities away from Sutton in your mind, Dan?
I don't think there's many opportunities to do it. Sutton's been the number one receiver multiple years and yet has nothing to really show for it outside of 2019.
Well, how did he finish last year?
Wide receiver 36 off of an abnormal amount of touchdowns.
Yeah, but he finished wide receiver 36. How did he finish in 2019?
I'd have to look that up real fast. But I'm also going to add he had Russell Wilson throwing him the ball, not a rookie quarterback.
You're right, he did. You're right, he did. And what did Russell Wilson do that Bo Nix probably won't do?
Throw deep balls and throw perimeter.
He spread the ball around.
Well, he didn't spread the ball around that much last year. Russell Wilson didn't spread the ball out that much last year. It was still consolidated who the ball was going to. But neither here nor there. Chris gets the debate win here. We got to move on and let's get into the tight ends a little bit. Travis Kelce, the first one up on the Rocket docket. Adam, you're the only one between me and Chris that has him at 2. So why do you hate Travis Kelce so much there, bud?
Look, I'm just only having a conversation with you about this because Chase isn't here, because we would be having a much bigger debate.
We would have a much different conversation if Chase was here, yeah.
So let me at least say that. Thank you very much. I feel like I'm getting... At any rate, look, I'm just doing it for you because if I decide that Laporta is my tight end 1, then we'll get the good Kelce. And then if not, we won't. Look, I love Kelce. I mean, he's getting real up there in age, and it's hard for me to keep betting on him. And I've been doing it, and look, tight end 2 is, come on. Like, I think he's the second guy. Look, I think Laporta is probably, outside of Amon-Ra, the next best weapon in that offense. I like Laporta quite a bit. So I'm erring that way. I think it's close. I think it's those two, and then it's the rest of them, as far as I'm concerned. I do think those two are a tier. And then after that, we're talking about, our Mark Andrews and the like. But I gave Laporta the slight edge. I liked my young guy. It's been a while since we've had a change of the guard at tight end. I think it's about time.
Well, you mentioned Laporta. Greg's the Lions guy. So, Greg, let me get your 2 cents on that one.
Kelce is the most consistent tight end that's ever played this game. The guy played last year. He missed 2 games. He played injured for probably 6 others. And if you look at his playoff run, he showed he's not over the hill with a receiver that can stretch the field like Hollywood Brown and like Xavier Worthy. That middle of the field is Kelce's domain, and nobody runs the read routes better than Kelce. I love Laporta. Kelce's going to outscore him by 50 points this year. I love Kelce. He's number 1.
Yeah, I think people really they seem to forget that Travis Kelce was not 100% to start the season last year and still was a tight end 1 on a points per game basis. So yeah, I'm 100% with you there. Let's dive into Brock Bowers. Chris, this is the person you're highest on in this list. You have him at tight end 8, which I think is a little aggressive. So why are you so confident Brock Bowers, a rookie tight end with a bad quarterback situation, can be a top 8 tight end?
Well, obviously, I'm not as anti-Raiders offense as I think you and Adam seem to be. I don't think Gardner, Minshew, or Aidan O'Connell are going to light the world on fire, but I don't think they're scrubs per se either, and I think they can feed multiple mouths. And I do think Brock Bowers is a top talent on this Raiders offense. I think he's one of the more talented guys that you can in this draft coming out. A guy that I was super high on as a weapon, not just as a tight end, but as a weapon. Now, as a tight end, this is a guy that you necessarily don't have a guard for. We talked about Travis Kelce and how hard that is for a guy that you can't necessarily match up with. You put a D-back on him, you put a safety, you put a linebacker on him, a guy you can move around, he can line up in the slot, put his hands on the ground, he can come off and play action and come off and drive down the field and get open that way. So Brock Bowers has a lot of ways he can kind of provide impact into the offense. And one thing that I have some trust in Luke Getsy for is he's able to get his receiver the ball, and he's able to get his tight end the ball. Cole Clement was top 7 the last 2 years in half-point PPR. So we talk about a guy when I feel like 8. I'm not looking. I think I'm shooting too high. I think I'm looking at a guy who can get similar numbers, a guy who could probably going to get maybe 80 to 90 targets. We saw Dalton Kincaid as a rookie get 92 targets last year, so getting a rookie 90 targets isn't outlandish. A guy that can possibly get you 6 to 7 touchdowns. And a guy can get you around 800 to 900 yards. So you put those things together, that's a tight end top 6, top 7. So I think for me, Brock Bowers is a guy that this offense is definitely going to look to get involved outside just Davante Adams. I think he's the second mouth to feed. He's also a guy they're going to hand the ball to. They're going to get the ball to him in different ways. So I think Brock Bowers is a guy that I love in the red zone. I know you're chuckling, Dan, but it is a guy that I think that he has potential.
I'm not chuckling because I think Brock Bowers doesn't have the ability to do that. I'm chuckling because I will pay money the day Luke Getsy actually draws up plays to do that for Brock Bowers. That's why I'm chuckling. It's not because of Bowers.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be a Luke Getsy's allowed to say too many things. I think that Brock Bowers is going to be on the field. That's pretty much Antonio Pierce's demand, that one way or another you're going to get this guy involved. So that's what I do trust, that Antonio Pierce shows you he prioritizes his playmakers. He prioritizes his coaches and tells them who get the ball to. Brock Bowers, to me, is one of the most talented guys, like I said, on that Raiders offense, and this guy who can be second fiddle to a receiver 1 who's going to get a lot of attention, a lot of safety help. So that leaves that middle open for Brock Bowers. And was O'Connell or Minshew, they're both going through the tight end position because usually young guys do. So I like all those things to add up for upside opportunity.
I mean, I'm not down on him because I do have him as a top 12 tight end, and he's a big reason. Again, like I said, I'm way out on Meyers, but there's a lot of obstacles you have to overcome as a rookie tight end. I mean, Greg, how do you see this thing? I mean, Bowers being a special talent and everything.
Rookie tight ends don't do what Laporta did. That's so unusual. Look at Kelce's rookie year. I mean, frankly, Meyers, you can be out on him, but remember last year when he was drafted, he was the top tight end in the class, and people thought he was a superior talent. How much of the play does Brock Bowers get as a rookie this year? Quarterback situation you guys have mentioned. I think he's going way too early and way too high. I think Chris hit his ceiling. I think he can finish 8, but I don't think it's likely. I think he's much more likely to finish around 15 to 16. And the truth is, after the top 6 tight ends, most years, there's such a huge drop off that you can punt tight end until late in your draft and take anybody.
Well, Clement, number 7, 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's fair. But Cole Kmet was also 3 years into his career and wasn't really splitting touches with anybody else. I do think the Mayer thing. I'm not making an argument. First of all, that Bowers is going to be losing an abnormal amount of touches to Mayer or anything like that. But snap wise, red zone wise, Mayer being the better blocker, especially early on in September, is where I do wonder.
That's why I brought up Dalton Kincaid.
That's
why I brought up Dalton Kincaid and 92 targets.
Right, and Dalton Kincaid wasn't good for fantasy until Dawson Knox was out of the way. So
the 92 targets was the key that I'm focusing on, and that's around what Cole
that
Clement
wasn't enough to make him a top 12 tight end, was it?
It was enough to make Cole Clement the top 7 tight end 2 years in a row. So that's what I'm going off the 90.
because of touchdowns. That's the key. Is Bowers going to get enough touchdowns with this offense? Again, I'm not much lower than you on him. I have him as a top 12 end too.
Is Brock Bowers getting 7 touchdowns outlandish?
I think as a rookie, I think it's high end. I think that's about as good as he can get. And I think
is outlandish? No, I wouldn't say
outlandish. Yeah, I think your numbers on receptions and yards are
and Brock Bowers is like a generational talent, but okay. We'll see.
Laporte's in a
I hate that
comparison there. Laporte's in a much better offense, a much better quarterback, a much better situation across the board with nobody that he had to split snaps with at the tight end position. It's a totally different. It's apples and oranges you're comparing there. Even if Bowers is a better talent, quote unquote, than Laporta, you still need the context of everything else around you to be able to do what he did. But we're going to end on that note with our underdog specials. I only had 3 because I couldn't find a Denver Bronco prop that I liked, but I do like Travis Kelce higher than 950.5 receiving yards this year. He hasn't been lower than that mark since 2015. Yeah, take Travis Kelce higher than 950.5 yards. Lad McConkey higher than 725 yards this season. We've talked about McConkey to death, how we think he could be the lead target of this team, and 725 is low for a guy who could be the wide receiver 1 in this offense with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. Zamir White, I have him higher than 4.5 rushing touchdowns. Look, Josh Jacobs had 6 in 13 games. Zamir White's going to be taking all of his work, especially inside the 5-yard line. While it's not an offense that he's going to score a ton, I do think we're going to see more than 4.5 rushing touchdowns as long as White plays 13 games or more this season. And those are your underdog specials for this division. Big thank you to Greg Kellogg here coming on to the show and spending time with us. Appreciated it so much, man. I want you to tell everybody, some things you've been working on, what you want people to check out, where to find you at, and hopefully we'll see you soon at the Expo.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at the Expo. I do a Thursday podcast, 7 o'clock Eastern, called Thursday Checkdown with the sports affiliation. You can see the logo up. Is that the way? Nope, the other way. Up there. These guys, they want to keep fantasy fun and positive. So that's why at my age, I don't need the negativity. But I do want to invite you guys in season. I'd like to get one of you on to do my podcast. And then off season next year, I'd like to have all of you on to talk what you're doing next year. So stay in touch with me on Twitter. You can find me at Gregory L. Kellogg, which is in the name. Thanks for putting that up, Dan. I know you don't like to. I appreciate that. You guys are fun. You are. And I don't know what your subscriber numbers are, but you're with Tyler. Is it Tyler Bradley?
Bradley, yep. CEO of Fantasy Football Advice Network.
Tyler, I met this last offseason, and he's a good guy. He really is. And he's doing things right, and bringing you guys on, I think, was a great move. You guys are very knowledgeable. You do the micro analytics a lot more than I do. I do not. There was no ADOT when I started. So I like ADOT, but what does it really tell you? It tells you the depth of the target. But, if the guy's only got 5 targets, that's meaningless. And if it's a full year, the depth of the target doesn't. I just think that too many people use micro analytics and don't actually study the coaches. I think, but you guys talked about the coaches today, and I love that about your show. I really do. People need to tune in. You guys do a great job. You got good chemistry, and you're fun. You put up Gardner Minshew for me. I love that. I do. The guy's a stud. He's a stud. He's jacked. He's got to be the quarterback. You get the women fans.
Greg, we put up anything for you, man. We appreciate you coming on. Appreciate the kind words. And yeah, we'll absolutely get on your show when we can definitely schedule that out after today's show. Guys, make sure you're checking us out. Operation Domination. You can follow us always live. We try to be live on Wednesday nights as much as humanly possible. Sometimes we get some guests. We got to reschedule. Right now, we're in the books for Wednesday night next week. Make sure you subscribe to at Advice Network. Make sure you follow Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app. You can follow me at Dan Mater FF. You can follow Adam as well. Chris is working the at OP Domination FF Twitter handle for the show. So you can find us in all kinds of different ways. And the biggest thing we're going to be available for is the Fantasy Football Advice Network website, which is going to be a whole community platform. People are going to come in, ask for fantasy football advice, comment on everything, basically a social media platform for just fantasy football. So make sure you go ahead and check out fantasysports.com. It's not just going to be football. They're going to be opening up basketball and baseball in the future. Right now, football is full go, though. So make sure you go ahead and check that out. We'll see everybody next week. Have a great weekend. Hey there, I'm proud to say that Underdog Fantasy is the newest sponsor of our show, and it's my favorite place to play fantasy games. No waivers, no trades, no lineup settings, just best ball for season-long drafters all year long. And you gotta check out Pick'em. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players. You can choose whether they go higher or lower on those stats, and if you can pick 5 in a row, you can win 20 times your money. Sound like fun? Well, guess what? You can sign up with promo code FFAdvice today to claim your special pick, plus a first-time deposit offer up to $250 in bonus cash. I cannot wait to see your entries.